All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome again to Marquette University Law School in Eckstein Hall. I'm Mike Goucher, and this is On the Issues. This is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers, people, as we say, who are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. Today, we are joined by a couple of members of the new Wisconsin Elections Commission. First of all, I want to introduce the gentleman to my far left over here. It's Mark Thomsen. He is the chairman of the commission. Mark is an attorney with Cannon Dunphy. He's a Milwaukee guy. He's also a Democrat. And seated next to me is Don Millis. Don is also an attorney. He's from Sun Prairie. He's a shareholder in the Madison office of Reinhart Boerner Van Deuren, and he is one of the commissioners on the newly formed Wisconsin Elections Commission. So please give Mark Thomsen and Don Millis a warm welcome to Marquette University Law School.
Thank you all.
Yep. So we have a Democrat and a Republican with us, and that's an important starting point for this conversation because the new commission is a partisan commission. And I want to begin by asking each of these gentlemen about this new commission and how it differs from its predecessor, the Government Accountability Board, which no longer exists. So, Chairman Thomsen, I'll begin with you. How does this new agency, this new body, differ from its predecessor?
Well, I'm going to let Don answer a lot of that because Don was on the Elections Commission before there was a GAB. I went to a couple of GAB-built meetings, and it was designed to be nonpartisan, and it was combined elections and ethics. And the legislature abolished that and created the new Wisconsin Elections Commission. And that allows Don and I and our fellow commissioners to sort of design the future. To me, I think institutionally going forward, some of the bigger questions become, what is the power structure in an entity that is created by a partisan legislature to create a partisan institution that has equal powers? There's 3-3. So if you have an entity that has equal powers, what does that mean? And I mean, that's already sort of reared its head recently in the context of the ongoing litigation, but I think we can touch on that later. Mm-hmm. But the issue then becomes, and I don't raise this just as a Democrat, I think going ahead it really becomes important regardless of who the majority party is. Because the question is, if you have a DOJ like we do now, that is the Department of Justice, and an Attorney General, Brad Schimmel, who is a Republican and is litigating his partisan agenda, that's how I see it, how does that then impact the Wisconsin Elections Commissions where it's 3-3? And how does the DOJ represent the 3 votes that are not the same as their party? And I think that's going to be an issue going forward regardless. To date, I think, Don and I, we share this. Every vote we've taken to date has been unanimous. I mean, we have tried to act as a single institution on the 2 key questions I think that have faced us to date. One was the appointment of the administrator, of Michael Haas. I mean, that was really crucial. We started on June 30th, and we had an election scheduled in August, and we have a huge presidential election on November 8th. And our main concern as commissioners is how do you have continuity and make sure we have fair, efficient elections, and we'll touch on why they're not rigged later, I'm sure. But I think there was every commissioner, regardless of your partisan background, said Mike Haas is the most qualified, best person to do it. And then the next single big issue was the budget. Currently, about 60% of the WEC staff budget is federal dollars that is going to have to be picked up by the legislature. And Don was kind enough to move the staff budget. It was passed unanimously by the WEC. And now, together we're going to go to the the legislature and the governor, and I ask everybody in this room to weigh in on that. We need the money if we're going to have a staff that can continue to maintain quality elections in the state.
So let me, because you do come at this from a really interesting perspective, having served on the predecessor to the GAB and now the successor to the GAB.
I served on the elections board for, I guess it was 4 years. I was Governor Thomson's designee back then, back in 1997. I think the strength of the elections board, and the old elections board certainly was not perfect, there were flaws, but one of the strengths was that you had, for the most part, people who were involved in elections. They understood elections. Now, the old elections board handled campaign finance issues. Right. The new elections commission does not. That's a separate agency. But I think some of the controversy that accompanied the GAB, I think, came about because they didn't have people who were experienced with campaigns. And one of the issues, one of the big differences between the GAB's, some of the GAB's actions and the old elections board's actions had to do with this issue of cooperation between campaigns. And that was an issue that myself and a guy named David Hallbrooks, who's a prominent Democrat in Milwaukee, we agreed on. We understood the limits of cooperation. We understood when it crossed the line. And I think we had a very clear understanding. I think that was an issue that I think the GAB got off the rails and caused some of the issues, and the courts found that there are problems there. So I think the old model had the strengths. I think having partisan input is very important. I think that'll actually help the administration of elections rather than having people who really aren't involved in it. Again, the role is different. I think the better model of the Wisconsin Election Commission is more built on agencies like the Federal Elections Commission or other federal agencies where you have equal number of Democrats and Republicans, and you need 4 votes to do anything significant. And so I think that forces the commission to act in a bipartisan way or a nonpartisan way. So I think it's actually a pretty good model. I think it'll be effective.
I did want to ask each of you, I mean, the rap against, I guess, the Federal Elections Commission is that because you have this partisan nature to it, that when push comes to shove, people retreat to their own, partisan perspectives, and that you can't decide some of the big issues. What do you say about that?
Well, I think I think one of the downsides of the law, again, on those issues, there's typically campaign finance issues. That's more the elections or the ethics commission. But I think one of the issues there is under the old law, if someone was in violation, you had the right of electors to bring an action. That was taken out. That's not there. I think that probably is one of the downsides. I think another improvement, although I think we could go further from the change to the GAB, is if you recall, historically, going back in the perspectives way back when, you had an ethics board and an elections board. The ethics board operated in secret. I mean, it was, people could get opinions, and often sanctions were totally secret. One of the problems of the GAB, which is still probably a little bit of a problem with the new law, but I think we can hopefully change that, is that you could represent public officials at the GAB, there would be sanctions, and no one would know about it. I represented a statewide candidate who was investigated by the Division of Criminal Investigation, for the Justice Department. We ended up agreeing to a sanction, and this is during the campaign. No one found out about it. Now, for my client, that was great. For the public, that's not so great. So I think that was one of the problems of the old GAB. I think the Ethics Commission will hopefully have the ability to operate more in the open. We certainly operate as the Elections Commission in the open. So I think that's another important advantage. I should answer that earlier, but that's
all right.
Anyway, but no, I think that going forward, there is the issue about inertia, about the agency not being able to act. The issue here, though, is you still have, even though you don't have the specific statute that allows citizen groups to bring lawsuits, right now we have 2 lawsuits that are pending in the Seventh Circuit that are compelling us to act in a constitutional manner. And so even though we may have impasse, you're always going to have groups on both sides pushing us. And so I'm not as concerned about that. I think that we're going to have to be responsive. We're going to have to act in a way that's consistent with the law, or else we're going to be defendants in lawsuits.
Mm-hmm. Anything you want to add to that, or?
Yeah, I mean, just briefly. I think a lot of this is going to depend on what happens going forward. For example, there is a unanimous vote by the WEC on Michael Haas as the administrator. He needs to be confirmed by the Senate to hold that job. The commission is, I think, united with Mike that we're going to have a successful, incident-free election in November 8th, and the test should be on whether he's confirmed on whether or not it's competent and it's been run in a fair and open way. But, how that plays out depends on what happens in different branches of the government and how that impacts us as a commission. We'll see.
That confirmation vote's early next year,
That's
right?
Exactly. And I think the budget, right now we have an agreement by everybody on the commission that we have to have this budget, but I certainly foresee that there is going to be nickel and diming on the budget discussions on whether or not the staff that is in place now that ensures that we do have effective elections, whether they're actually needed. How that then plays out into the decisions of the WEC is really, that's more complicated, and we'll see. But I think that's why we have, to date, agreed that Mike Haas is the best qualified, best person for the job, and we've agreed that the budget is necessary to fund the organization going forward. That's crucial, but we don't get to tax, okay? And we don't get to make those decisions independent of what happens.
You look like you wanted to.
Oh, no, I'm just
You're just
ready and waiting.
Okay,
He's agreeing
good.
with me.
Good. I want to talk about some of the challenges in front of the Elections Commission right now. Let's begin with voter ID and where we stand with that, because when we were promoting this event, we talked about possible confusion, because let's face it, the voter ID law was passed in 2011. It's been in effect for a couple of elections since then, but mostly it's been in litigation since then. And it will be in effect in November. Do you think people understand that the voter ID law is in effect this November?
I think so. I think there's certainly going to be folks that are that will not be aware of what needs to be done. We've taken efforts to educate them. The court has asked us or ordered us to take additional efforts. With any change in law, you're going to have some issues. Obviously, it's a fundamental constitutional right. We want to make sure that everyone has every opportunity. The court has largely, after ordering the parties to work together, we've come to an agreement on virtually everything in terms of educating the public. We're still waiting for one last order from the court that could order us to spend additional funds, if need be, to educate. We've spent $250,000 to promote and help folks understand where they can go. I think we had a good plan in terms of where we spent the money. A lot of it was in social media. A lot of it was in trying to target groups that we suspect are not likely to have legal IDs or IDs that would make them eligible. A lot of things like bus stops, a lot of movie theaters, a lot of social media posters on campuses and things like that. So, we've made an effort. Does everyone know about it? Probably not everyone. But hopefully we've made the effort to carry out the law, because all we can do as an agency is carry out the law. We don't make the law.
Mark Thomsen, are we prepared for November 8th in terms of voter education efforts about the ID?
I'll put it this way. I think the WEC and its staff is. Whether or not the DMV has it in place, that's a different question.
Department of Motor Vehicles.
Right. And that's where you go to get your ID. And how it works the week before the election and the week of the election is yet to be seen. I think, sort of the background on this is because Don mentioned there was a $250,000 budget. There was a $250,000 that came out of a GAB vote before we even came into existence, that was essentially designed for broader voter ID. And that was all done pretty much, all that money was spent by the end of August, September a lot of it. So when we got the court's order recently as to the IDPP, which is a much more particular nuance of the voter ID, is what documents do you need in hand to go to the DMV so you get a certificate that you can vote with on November 8th, or at least show up on the Friday, if you cast a provisional ballot.
So this is the ID petition process.
ID petition process, IDPP. On that, and we said this to Judge Peterson, we did not have any additional funds. WEC is not a taxing authority. We have no ability to go get money over and above to focus specifically on the IDPP. We did find $26,000 in-house where we tried to address it. We don't control the training at the Department of Motor Vehicles. And so how that gets played out, the Elections Commission and its staff has limited power. Now, Mike Haas and the staff has contacted clerks, and hopefully you've been contacted, right? Hopefully you've got the information. I mean, I brought along, this is the palm card that the court ordered us to have available. I mean, we are making it, making that available to anybody that we can. We're paying for a few thousand of these things to be handed out. The big issue is going to be and I think part of the discussion is what kind of TV needed to be done on it. And we don't have any money to do a broad statewide campaign that, takes up. I mean, right now the TV, all the ads are paid for by the leading candidates, and it's very, very expensive time to buy. Mm-hmm. And we don't have any money to do that. So I am hoping, this goes back to your question, do people understand? I'm assuming most of the people in this room understand, and some people may have already voted. But as to folks that don't pay attention, I don't know.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you, as representatives of the commission, how confident you are in the fact that most people will be able to legally vote. Most people who want to be able to legally vote will actually be able to do that. And I ask that because of things the judge has said. The judge raised questions about whether people in the Department of Motor Vehicles were giving people who needed an ID accurate information because of the lack of money for the voter education effort. So I guess I'm just asking, as representatives, how confident are you that the people who want to vote will be able to vote? I'm going to go first.
Well, I guess I would say I'm reasonably confident. We're sort of in the unknown here. Now, we actually will know, because we'll know how many people cast provisional ballots, and we'll know how many people were able to come back and, for lack of a better term, ratify those ballots with ID. So we'll have a sense of that. So that would be one measure. I think we are reasonably confident, again, because our efforts have been, and again, part of the reason for starting early with the campaign was because it's cheaper. There's less clutter on the air. I mean, I'm a political animal, and I get sick of campaign ads this time of year. I don't even watch the news sometimes, because I'm just sick of all the ads.
That's heresy. You can't
I know,
say
I
that.
should say that.
Come on.
I get sick of half the ads.
I get sick of it. I'm bipartisan in my loathing of campaign ads. Anyway, and the other issue is we wanted to reach people earlier, because I think many of us, by human nature, are procrastinators, and we're trying to get, alert people that they should be thinking about this weeks ago. Now, we do have the petition process. It has been, the court has expanded the rules or made it easier. And so, we're hopeful that, everyone who wants to vote, and there's a question about how many people want to vote this election, but be that as may, whoever wants to vote will be able to vote. And so, I guess, am I 100% confident? I'm not. But I think I'm very confident that the vast majority of the folks who want to vote will be able to vote.
If there was a bet you could place in Vegas, I would make this bet, that there are going to be more people on November 8th, at the end of this cycle, that will be prevented from their ballot counting as a result of the voter ID and the confusion. More of those than there are any instances of fraud or voter impersonation, or even felons voting. That, to me, is dead certain. There are going to be fewer people whose ballots are going to be counted, and there are going to be more people that are going to lose their vote over this. Now, that I would bet money on. Now, setting that aside, I agree with Don on this. Institutionally, and the staff, given its resources, what it's done, we are doing what we can do. And I mean, we'll rely on Mike Haas and the staff that, Mr. Kennedy helped create. And they're very, very competent folks. And, generally, I've been voting. I go walk down the street to my precinct, and the folks know me now. They say, "I'm sorry, we got to ask for your ID. It's making the lines long, and I apologize." But me and my neighbor's going to vote, and the issue is how many people are going to be impacted by voter ID, and there are going to be more of those votes at the end of the day than any fraud, because the fraud is it was a myth from day one.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to that in a moment. But I do want to talk about early voting, because I'm sitting here talking about people being able to vote, but a lot of people already are voting. What are the latest numbers in terms of how many people are going to the polls? And well, we'll start there and establish that. How many people have voted already?
How about if I do the general, because Don has really done some really good thinking about this and has some very valuable information to share. I have sort of the global. As of yesterday, there were 386,634 absentee ballots. There are 327,859 in. I mean, it's quite a few people have already voted. And we had a little glitch on the absentee ballot issue in terms of the witnesses to the ballot had to have an address, and Don and I spent quite a bit of time at a meeting recently trying to come up with the best fix to that, mandating clerks that if you know the person, you know their address, you make sure you count the ballot. And that was in large part to a lot of people in Milwaukee that came, and the mayor of Milwaukee came and said, "Look, this is a ridiculous situation." But Don has some really insightful, I think, breakdown on what the votes mean.
So the numbers that Mark gave you are the absentee ballots that we traditionally think of, the ones that you got in the mail, you picked up and you mailed in, but it also includes those who actually go to the polling place, because it's the same, technically the same thing. It's just that you put it in an envelope and you put it in the ballot box yourself instead of mailing it. They're all counted on election day. So that's the early voting both ways. That number, by the way, 327,000, that's a little bit more than 10% of the total votes cast in the 2012 election. About a little over 3 million votes cast statewide in the last presidential election. So you can see where we're at. If Judge Peterson had not struck down or modified the limits on early voting would have started Monday. And we've been 2 weeks prior to the election, and there have been some other changes. So I was curious, because I'm always interested in empirical data versus conventional wisdom and whatnot. So what I did is I looked at the 250,000 people who voted prior to Monday, and we keep daily track of that at the Elections Commission. And now it's not an exactly perfect situation, because clerks have 48 hours to report that, so it's not exactly perfect. But if you distribute those 250,000 votes among the counties, what you find is kind of interesting. If you compare, which counties are ahead of the pace from last 4 years ago, in other words, their early voting totals represent a greater share of their vote from 4 years ago, you find there are 14 counties that are actually ahead of the game. 8 of those counties would be counties that are not well, let's put it this way. When Judge Peterson changed or struck down the law, the concern was that people who didn't have access to the polls, or working poor or underprivileged, would be the ones for whom the limits were going to affect them adversely. If you look at the counties that have the early vote, that have the greatest effort on early voting, many of them are some of the more affluent counties. It's ironic. 8 of those 14 counties are actually probably a little bit more affluent if you do it on the poverty level. If you look at number of people under poverty, 6 of those counties went for Romney in 2012. And so you've got a real mix. You've got Ozaukee County. actually, Milwaukee County is actually lagging behind where they were. They were about 16% of the vote 4 years ago. If you look at those early voting, there's about 14%. A little more. And so it's kind of interesting, not a huge difference, but it's not what you would expect. Now, Dane County's way ahead. So it's, like I say, it's a real mixed bag. You can't really, I really hope that someone really studies this and tracks these patterns and all that. But based on the data, it's not entirely clear that it's the target of Judge Peterson's decision is really the people who are taking advantage of it.
So help us understand whether early voting is inherently a good thing, because you see the parties now placing greater and greater emphasis on this. And yet the question I have is, with more, at least in some places, more and more people choosing to vote early, does that place a particular stress on clerks, on municipalities? How does that work in real life, given some of the challenges you face with more people wanting to vote early? I think it's a good thing. I wish we had more early voting, and I wish it was universal. And my concern is. So you want uniformity in terms of?
I guess I want, well, a couple things. It's not necessarily, I wouldn't say necessarily uniformity. Here's my concern. So, and again, I come at this from both ends, from just public policy and as a conservative or a Republican. My concern is, and it really has more to do with the clerks in some of the rural areas and the townships there. You know, in many of those places, if you want to vote early, in many parts of the state, you have to go to the clerk's home. And I just don't think that's right. I don't know why, we can't have a mandate. Again, Republicans are not supposed to like mandates on local governments, but why we can't say, look, it's just as important for a farmer or a person living in Forest County to be able to vote early at a public polling place as it is for Milwaukee, Madison, or Green Bay, or La Crosse. Why aren't we doing that? And that's one of the downsides that I see with the current system. I would like to encourage more early voting. The other issue with early voting, or the other benefit of early voting, is that you reduce lines on election day, and that discourages people from voting. Now, I live in Sun Prairie. Sun Prairie is a suburban city in Dane County. I live across the street from the library. It's one of the polling places, and I can guarantee you that from 7:15 till 9 o'clock and from 4 o'clock until 8 o'clock, the line will be out the door. I'll be able to see it from my window and see the people waiting outside. And that discourages people from voting. So you drive in the parking lot and you say, well, I don't want to wait in that line. I'm going to come back later. Maybe you never come back later, or you come back later and the line is just as long. And so I think early voting is good. I think it provides opportunities to have less stress on election day. And I'm guessing most clerks would rather have less stress on election day and have additional staffing, have to spend a little extra money. But I would like to see it, I'm not saying uniform necessarily, but certainly the opportunity granted for voters throughout the state. And I think that's my biggest concern.
What's your take on this?
Let me just put it this way. And I mean, Don summed it up really well. Why this is one of the reasons why I'm optimistic in terms of the current makeup of the commission and our ability to work together. I mean, Don's personal view is one where you allow access to as many voters as possible, and you reduce the load on the clerks, and you make it as efficient as possible. That means, though, the state has to invest money and change and spend money up in Wautoma, where my mom and my sister live. You have to spend money across the board in Milwaukee and in the countryside on paying clerks and paying the staff to allow us to all have, a fair and efficient election. And even more so going ahead, because and we'll talk about this when we talk about the security of the system and how it has to be decentralized so you can't hack it. But when you have a decentralized system, you have to fund it. I mean, the software and the hardware to fund these things costs money. And so there has to be a unified voice in Madison on how you're going to spend the dollars. To make Don's analysis a dream come true we're going to need money.
I agree, just one more point. I guess, not to get too fine points, one of my concerns is elections, holding elections is one of the most fundamental things a local government can do. We had this discussion years ago, I remember with Kevin, when local governments had the option of opening at 8 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. I mean, that's just, we shouldn't tolerate that. We should, and now there's a uniform time. I have no problem telling clerks, you have to make a public place available for early voting during these certain days, and the state doesn't need to pay for that, because that's what democracy is all about. And if you can't run an election, again, I'm just aghast. It's one thing to tell people they have to build better roads or they have to spend more money and the state's not going to participate. But holding elections is fundamental. And I have no problem telling local clerks, look, you got to have a public place that's handicap accessible for early voting for 28 days prior to the election. That's fine.
I'd like, before we move on to a couple other topics, I did want to ask you each for a quick reaction, and I don't know whether you're in a position to give a reaction, but there was a story that made a fair amount of news yesterday. It was also in the New York Times. Some of the national media outlets picked it up, and this involves this request by a Democratic state lawmaker who wants an early registration place in Green Bay, on the UW Green Bay campus. There were some lines there during the April primary. He thought that might help address some of the students' concerns. And the clerk in Green Bay, and I want to accurately portray her position on this, the clerk said, I don't think this is going to happen because we have concerns about budget, security, ballot security, things like that. But she also asked of the Wisconsin Elections Commission's legal representative, she said, does this fall into one of these two that, it's unfair politically because college students tend to vote more Democratic? And can I cite that as a reason for saying, no, we're not going to have a place for students to do early voting? What was your reaction to that? It's ended up quite predictably along partisan lines on what she had to say, but I'm curious about your reaction to that. Was it handled properly?
Well, I'll go first. I've already heard. I thought that Nate Judnick, the attorney for the commission, handled it well. Said he basically, and again, part of the approach that the commission takes with clerks and the staff is that we try to work with them. We don't slap consent degrees. We try to say, probably not the best idea.
Yeah.
And that was the
kind of what he said.
That was the reaction. Yeah. It was not say under no circumstances would you be able to do that, which is probably not an incorrect answer either. I guess in terms of the request, conceivably, you could have a situation where a location of a polling place would, for example, I don't think people would like the polling place to be at Republican Party headquarters. It shouldn't be at Democratic Party headquarters. That would clearly fall. But I think a campus is probably not falling into that. Now, it's interesting. I believe Milwaukee is, and again, this is everything I've gotten here second and third hand. I understand that there was the discussion about having one at UWM. I was told that it wasn't, the reason that it wasn't put on UWM here was because the concern that it wouldn't be taken advantage of because students tend to wait till the last minute, like my daughter, Eau Claire. I told her to go vote early, and she says, no, I'll wait in line on election day. Don't understand that. So anyway, there are all sorts of reasons why you do it. I think that was probably, I guess it's something to think about. It certainly wouldn't influence my mind, putting it on a campus or not. That would not be one of the considerations.
I should point out Green Bay has one place where you can vote early. I think it's at City Hall, isn't it?
Probably.
In Green Bay? Yeah. Which is about 15 minutes from campus.
It is further away,
yeah. I thought it was, much ado about nothing, frankly. Because I think Don sort of summarized it. There's a law that says you can't put it in a place that may benefit one. The clerk says there's a rumor that students vote more Democrat than other. That comes up. It's an email. Somebody picks it up. The nation runs it. And all of a sudden we have this major partisan issue. Frankly, and here's the other thing. The WEC, the commission, Don and I, we don't see this stuff. This is not in, we don't get paid for this. this is public service, essentially. I mean, we get paid when we show up in Madison, but, so the staff handles the calls. Nate gets a call, this is September, I mean, this is old news. And what he just says, look, I wouldn't assume that the students at UW Green Bay are necessarily just voting Democrat. That's what he said, don't start with that assumption. And, certainly then, because if it's a wrong assumption, then that shouldn't stop you from putting it there if it's a good idea for Green Bay to do it. So the fallout in the press afterwards to me was, I think it just reflects the low level of coverage on some of it's really not an issue.
I want to go back to something you were talking about, Chairman Thomsen. You were talking about the voter fraud issue, but I do want to ask about that subject in this context, that you've got one of the presidential candidates, Donald Trump, who has been very clear in saying he believes the election is rigged. It will be rigged. He says that repeatedly at campaign appearances. What impact does that have on the Election Commission's ability to carry out its election? Does it have any impact at all? Does it raise any concerns with either of you?
Well, to me, just the starting point that the candidate of the leading opposition party makes the statement that elections are rigged in this country, first, it's just false, it's not true, and it feeds, a false theory, a false strategy. I mean, it flows from me logically out of that voter ID or voter fraud was a huge problem too. It just never was. I mean, if you look at the data, it never was a major, voter fraud was not this huge issue. I mean, we had a meeting recently in terms of the number of felons voting. It was so insignificant, we didn't even know whether we wanted to keep the records anymore because it had no virtual impact on any real election anywhere. And the debate was, do we balance, do we keep the data or don't we spend the money gathering the data because it may cost more than it does anything. So you go back to the system itself, it's decentralized. It's all local hard drive. You can't hack it. And we have 1,854 municipal clerks, 72 county clerks. To say that it was rigged in Wisconsin would mean that you would have to orchestrate a huge conspiracy of all those people and their friends. And you all know the people you vote with at the polling, but you got to get everybody you know involved in this conspiracy to rig it. And that's why it's never been an issue before. It just hasn't been an issue. So to me, going into the election, our concerns are there going to be people there that are making noise, claiming it's rigged at the polling place, and how do you handle that? And from all indication, we haven't heard that that's going to be a big problem. So the question is afterwards. What do you do afterwards if people say it was rigged and we're not going to abide by the election? That's a different question.
Mm-hmm. The commission, as does everyone, we have an interest in promoting the legitimacy of elections. I see no evidence of widespread voter fraud that's ever affected an election. You hear about dirty tricks and things like that. But there are a lot of things that we do to make sure that at least people have the perception and the understanding, because you just don't know it. Once, several elections ago, I had to go, in my role as a watcher for the Republican Party, had to go to a campaign place where the Democratic observer was greeting voters at the door as they came in, and had to tell them, he really can't do that. And he agreed he couldn't do that. And so that's one of the things that we do. The guy's now a judge, unfortunately. So. Anyways, but we're good. We're tight. So, but there are a lot of things that we do to make sure that we don't have we prohibit electioneering near a ballot polling place. There are lots of things we do, and there's a debate about whether voter ID is one of those things that will help promote the confidence in the election. And I don't want to get into a debate about the pros and cons of voter ID. It doesn't help when one of the candidates is going out and saying it's rigged, and because to me it's just a suggestion that it's sort of a fallback when he loses. He's saying that, but we bend over backwards to be even-handed. We have all sorts of rules about the conduct of elections so that people understand that they're fair. So it's not just that the elections are fair. We want to make sure that they perceive that they're fair. Because I really do think that, other than, I'm sure there are some instances where people try to vote twice or felons vote and all that. I don't think it affects. I've never seen a situation where it's affected the outcome of an election. But we certainly want to promote not only fair elections, but the perception of fair elections.
Do you have any concerns about, and you touched on this, do you have any concerns about emotions at polling places, given the fact that, let's face it, it's been a pretty tough campaign. Both sides feel pretty strongly about the opposition. Do you worry about that?
Well, a little bit. I mean, one of the things that we do is you can't walk into a polling place with a Hillary sticker or a Trump sticker. The idea is not to identify people. We've actually had a discussion about people taking selfies at the polling place and about we have a prohibition on that sort of thing, but
hey, if Justin Timberlake can do it,
yeah, I know.
come on.
I saw that, and I thought, and so I mean, that sort of, again, you hate to cramp someone's style, but you also don't want to have demonstrations at polling places. I know the polling place that I vote at, I think it was may have been the spring primary, the first one where we had voter ID, and they had a sign saying, "This is not the place to debate voter ID." And it just, because the idea is that, there's a time and place, this is the place to vote, and you shouldn't be arguing with people about that either in line or with the clerks. And so I think that we do a lot of things to try to minimize that. I don't think it'll be any different now, but there's always a chance that people in line are going to start arguing, but I've never seen that in a widespread way, and I don't know why that would be different now.
I want to wrap up our part of the conversation by following up on something you said, Mark Thomsen. You mentioned that you can't hack these polling places on Election Day, and I was talking to Mike Haas about this, and he gave a pretty lengthy explanation of why he just thinks that that's not something that can happen. So I hear you saying you're very confident that the integrity of the election results will be there, that there's not going to be someone or some government agency somewhere interfering with the outcome of the election.
Yeah, I mean, municipal elections are set up, they're individual hard drives for individual systems. So, I mean, you cannot go on the internet and hack the system. I mean, you're just not connected. So you have 1,854 systems that you can't hack with. I mean, you would have to go hack all of those systems,
But if you hacked one of them,
well,
I mean, you could
county.
And look at the staff has been working with Homeland Security. They've had discussions on how to handle that if there's an attack on a particular system. What do you do? There's a whole protocol that is in place if we begin to suspect data. I mean, because they do a follow-up, study to test, the validity of the count. So there are a lot of built-in checks that I think I can say with confidence it would be, someone could not just from Russia hack our system and rig Wisconsin's election.
The one statewide database is the voter registration list, and so theoretically you might be able to get access to that. I think when I go to my polling place, and I think most polling places, because we don't have poll books universally used, or actually they're hardly used at all, they have a hard copy, and so that that would be the way in which you have a check on it. We have paper ballots almost everywhere. You fill out the paper ballot, scanned in, or as a receipt, and so and that's something I felt strongly about for a long time. I think we have to have a hard copy. If there's some concern that something's been hacked, we can go back to the hard copy. That's what recounts are all about. When we have recounts, and what you do is you pull out the paper ballots and you go one by one, and that's how we can count. So I guess I am not concerned about that. The biggest concern would be if somehow someone were to show up at the polling place and they're not on the registration list for somehow because there's been a hack. Well, in that case, they probably could do a provisional ballot, and we could go back and figure that out after.
All these, and this will be the exclamation point on this part of the discussion, then we'll take a couple questions from the audience. But, with all this talk about presumably the Russians trying to hack into various email accounts and influence the outcome of the elections, Does this give both of you pause in terms of moving towards online voting? I mean, that seemed to be the wave of the future. We're all going to vote online someday. That'll make it easy for everyone. Do you now pause when you talk about that prospect?
Oh, I do. I mean, if it's all online, and, there's too many hacks at that level.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at, it's this, and you look at the problems that major retailers, who's probably, my guess, is spending more money on security per transaction than the state is able to spend. Mm-hmm. I'm very concerned about the ability. And so I've never been really excited about online voting, but the experience of the last couple of years, and especially the last couple of months, is really, I guess I've always had this bias toward having a hard paper ballot so that you can always check. Maybe laborious, it may take you a month, but you can figure out who won the election.
Mm-hmm. Let's take some questions from the audience. If you're in the seating bowl, press down on the rim, not on the ball, but on the rim. If you're in the back, wait for Ryan, the gentleman in the plaid shirt, to bring a microphone over to you. How about right here? Yes. Just press down on the rim. Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
No, you hold it down. Hold it down. Thank you both for being here, and I want to talk about two things. One is to me, it's the hype about the Russians. If you actually look at what Clapper has said, that he said that some of the signatures are consistent with Russian, but that's far from proof that Russia is at all in any way involved in any of the leaks that have gone on. And in fact, former NSA officials have said that they think it's probably the NSA that has leaked these things. And so to me, this whole Russian thing is hyperventilation, and it's to distract people from, in particular, the contents of what has been leaked. And I think that comes down to the election as well, where I think the primaries and even testimony in Congress back in 2000 showed that, in fact, there are ways in which the machines, not necessarily individual machines, can be hacked, but when votes are tabulated, that an algorithm can be put in place where one person will get 1.75 times their vote.
Can I ask you, I hate to do this, but can you just ask the question and kind of just cut to the chase there?
In Wisconsin, is there any opportunity for that kind of tabulation manipulation to occur, where you're not dealing with 1,800 individuals, but you're dealing with some kind of central tabulation of votes where that particular district?
There are some counties that have central reporting that on election night. So they have, machines are connected, so the county clerk will get a readout, and it's I believe an internet-based system, so they can get that. That is not the official canvass, though. That is only an unofficial total for the benefit of the public and the media and all that. The actual total is off a machine. Now, you probably could, theoretically, because it is connected to the internet, or many of them are, you might be able to hack that. If there's a suspicion about that, though, you still have the hard paper ballots that you can count. So, I mean, I guess it's theoretically possible. A lot of the stuff is pretty low tech in that these optical scan readers are not, I would think that they're so low tech they may be hard to break in.
I think the other thing, just to touch on that, you got to have a little faith in the partisan nature of it. I mean, people are there, they watch, they count. They have a good sense in this ward where the votes are. And if they're all skewed, I mean, somebody's going to be screaming right away, and somebody's going to be screaming, let's look at the paper copy. And nobody talks about that in the realities, but I don't know if you've been around election night or election parties. I mean, people have numbers, and they have the numbers way before anything goes up on TV. And I mean, people are counting all over the place.
Yeah, they're counting how many votes are there, and if you have a disproportionate amount, people would be looking at it.
I'm going to go way in the back there. Again, keep your question brief, if you would.
I will. Something that you alluded to earlier, Mike, was the safety question I think you had at the polls. We have concealed carry in Wisconsin. A lot of these polling places are in public buildings and schools in particular. I happen to be a former educator, so this is a very sensitive issue to me. I don't know if the Election Commission has a responsibility in this, but the whole notion of keeping the polls safe.
The specific question implied there is, can you carry a weapon in? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know, that's something, I haven't thought about it. Virtually all local polling places are controlled by the clerk. A lot of them are public places. Some of them are places that the clerk takes over by agreement, or churches or schools and whatnot. I don't know what the answer is. We are obviously very concerned about safety, and we don't want people arguing. We don't want people, obviously physical violence is never want that. So I don't know the answer in terms of whether concealed carry is. That's something Kevin might know, but I don't know the specific answer. Mm-hmm. It's a good question.
You want to answer, Kevin?
You guys are on stage, not me.
That's too easy.
The answer is that each governing body controls their polling places. So
Right.
churches will often say that there's no concealed carry. So there's no concealed carry if that's a polling place. A lot of municipal buildings don't have that.
Right.
So it's going to depend on the polling places. And the truth is, you're going to get an argument both ways. Some people are going to say it's safer if you can carry a gun in.
I'm going to go way back here. Yes?
Short of casting a provisional ballot, is there any way of tracking whether or not someone wants to vote and they're denied the opportunity to vote?
Now, as a practical matter, no, we don't have the ability to track that. There isn't a place set up. I mean, if somebody shows they don't have the ID, there's a handout that they're given to what you need to come back and vote.
Right.
Okay, we don't have the ability, and there's no mandate from our commission to all the municipal clerks that if somebody has a question, you write down their name, address, and follow up, or a data bank. I mean, they're very, very busy, and it's just not that. So,
And likewise, if someone goes up to a Division of Motor Vehicles office and doesn't have it, and they just decide to leave, we're not able to track. I mean, I guess theoretically we might be able to do that, and I don't know what the Department of Transportation's protocol is, but that's not something that we're tracking, and that's a very good point.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You know, we talk about the election coming up, and that's important.
Keep your finger down on that.
I tried to. We talk about the current election and how important it is, but we need to maybe think beyond November. I'm out there as an SRD and as a poll worker, and I see it's convoluted. And I'm also from the South originally, and we say when the water is muddy, people don't want to step into it. And it's muddying the water with all these confusions. And how do we streamline and help educate people beyond November as to the voter IDs and the process? Because a lot of people are totally unclear, and they're also unclear about early voting. They understood that it was going to be delayed, and they didn't get the message whenever it did change. So. And we have to look at those social, economic issues that are impacting most.
To me, it raises two issues. The most immediate is what is going to be the outcome of the current litigation. These cases are all decided at a district court level, and on the Wisconsin 1 case, the Frank case, I mean, those are all cases that are going to be decided by the Seventh Circuit panel or en banc soon, after the election. That will give us a definition of what the law is under the current statutory structure. The second component of the question is, do we as a state sum up our experience since 2011 and say, has it really been worth the exercise? Or do we get rid of voter ID completely? But that's a question of winning elections and who's making the decisions. So I don't think, as long as we're a divided society on those questions, I don't know how much clarity and efficiency ultimately you can get.
Real briefly on that, that's one of the considerations as we've had these weekly hearings in front of the court and fine-tuning this. Every time we say something else or put up with a new palm card or something, we worry about the cost. while we want to educate people, but there's a cost of creating more confusion and just getting people to be disappointed. Just say, screw it, I'm not going to vote, I can't keep up. And so that's a very important point. We're going to get through this election. We're going to have a primary, there's a nonpartisan election cycle coming up. It'd be great to know what the rules are going to be by the 7th Circuit before then. I don't know that's going to happen. But once we know what the rules are going to be, we're going to have to redouble our efforts and say, okay, now, believe us now, these are the rules, and this is it, and we can go forward. So.
I'm going to take another couple questions here, back there, and then we'll come down. Yeah, well, hang on a second. I violated my own principle, but I didn't have the judge wait for the microphone earlier, so.
Just a quick, are you using television to get concerning education?
We had some early on, very short shots. I mean, I think that's pretty much already run.
Right.
And we don't have any more money to do any more on that. And the problem with even the public announcements, the later it gets in the election, the worse time they get to play. Because you end up there at 3 in the morning, and it's like, so maybe they're effective at 3 in the morning. I don't know.
In fact, listen, when we had this discussion, I was kind of concerned about putting all of our eggs in a very expensive basket with TV ads and whatnot. We did purchase some, and I expressed concern. I thought ads in buses and on campuses and other ways of getting this in front of people who really are the ones that we're after was a better way. I actually got a call from the lobbyist for the broadcasters saying, "Why are you bad-mouthing TV?" And so it's,
This may be the final one. Yeah, briefly, please,
Under
if I can.
the heading of efficiency, you mentioned the word efficiency. Other states do two things differently, two functions differently. One is you use a tabulator for early voting, and you save the cost of the envelope, and the clerk doesn't have to go and sign the envelope and all. That makes that faster and saves money. And the other is many states has an election commission per county, rather than every clerk having to do that work. And I've spoken to clerks who really hate the system because they have year-round functions to form, and then every 2 years, or definitely every 4 years, they're inundated with the election. Why doesn't Wisconsin do those two things?
All I can say is this. This is not the forum to address that question. Don and I don't have the ability to pass any legislation that's that broad.
Well, I think it's a good point, though, but there are two issues. In terms of tabulation, one of the issues that we tabulate votes in the presence of everyone, the election observers and all that. So that would mean if you're doing it early, you've got to have observers there to make sure that that everyone's watching it. I understand the issues with election day opening of absentee ballots is one more issue to have. Maybe there'll be a way of doing it on some other day. The issue about decentralization of government, that is Wisconsin. Every year, every couple of years, the Department of Revenue wants to take the assessment of property at the county level, and it gets shot down. It's one of the first things it's gone. And if you were to do that, I'm not saying it's not a bad idea, but politically, we push so much to local governments. There are many states don't have town governments. We do in Wisconsin. You're going to have to change the culture in more fundamental ways. That's just my opinion based on my observations.
I was going to take one more question. If you could do it really fast, and it'll take a really fast answer, too. So go ahead.
There are a lot of us who are volunteers, and I'm an SRD. That is going out. As far as I know, that is going to be a system that no longer exists shortly.
What is an SRB for people who don't know?
A special registration deputy. I could go in and register people to vote off-site and turn that information into the...
This is a good question for Don, because Don's party did pass that.
Yeah. So what's the question?
Why are you terminating?
Well, again, it may have been folks in my party. I didn't work there.
Didn't have anything to do with
it. So
Don's an attorney. Did we mention that? He doesn't, it doesn't work in
I was very clear. I didn't say Don did it.
That's right. So.
rationale if you would.
I know that occurred. It's one of those things that when I was asked to do this, I'm trying to get caught up on all this stuff since I was happily ignorant of much of this for like 15 years. So
I'm going to have to wrap things up there. Before we go, I just want to say thanks again to all of you who attended today. We always appreciate your interest and your attention. Hopefully you found today's discussion useful. We have a couple of more events coming up yet in November. Alan Borsick has a really good education event, and we have added one also on the 15th, which will feature the president of Microsoft for one of our On the Issues discussions.
Can I make one
Yeah,
announcement?
you sure can, yeah.
For any Marquette law students in the room, Marquette is going to be setting up a supervised fieldwork program, externship, next semester in conjunction with the Wisconsin Elections Commission. UW Law School has been doing it with the GAB and the WEC now, and as a proud Marquette alum, I'm here flying my colors, get the word out, and I'm going to be doing the personal supervision of that, so I'm looking for bright law students that are interested.
Okay.
Thank you.
And let's just say a thank you again to Mark Thomsen and Don Millis. Thank you. Gentlemen, thanks.